we just, I guess it's almost time to start.
Yeah, we'll probably need to give a few people a little while to get in too, because I mean,
I'll give it till 3 minutes after.
Probably something like that. I don't recall exactly how many people registered. I guess I could take a look.
I didn't see that.
I can check somewhere. Um, 170. Looks like registered.
Wow.
I'm sure we'll have some subset of that, of course.
All right, I'm getting actually notification that we should get started. Here we are recording. So if anyone does not want to be part of the recording, first of all, it will be available afterwards. And if you don't want to be a part of the recording, I guess we're not actually sharing this. I'm pulling this up at bank level type stuff. If you don't want to be part of the recording, then please leave. But that's the need to know principle. That's how it works at the bank. So I want to welcome everyone to the Adobe Analytics Champion office hours for June. Thank you for taking some time out of your day and joining us, especially when I know that there's an Adobe Journey Optimizer, Explore the Future of Adobe Journey Optimizer presentation going on right now as well. So again, we thank you for your time. My name is Shari Deutsch. I'm an experimentation team lead at US Bank. I'm located in New Jersey, and this is my first year being a champion. And it's been really exciting. And again, thank you for your time. So Jason, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Shari. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Egan. I'm an analytics architect at Search Discovery. Also, my first year as an analytics champion. I've been working in the Adobe stack for almost 20 years, probably somewhere in that range. Have helped them write certification exams and have been a practitioner as well as a consultant for various times within those last 20 years. Gitai, I'll let you go.
Sorry, having a few. Hi, I'm Gitai Ben-Ami. I am a digital strategist at Concentric Adobe for, I don't know, a dozen years or so. And this is my first year as an Adobe Analytics Champion. But yeah, I basically do everything but write code, and but I really like to solve problems using Adobe. Happy to be here.
Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm having some AV issues as well. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So I'm Katie Klein. Currently with Macy's Director of MarTech and AdTech. I've been working with Adobe Solutions, specifically analytics, for about 10 years now, maybe a little longer. I was an Adobe Analytics Champion in 2021, so I'm super excited to be back with the group chatting about this today. And yeah, looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So we have questions that were already submitted. If we want to jump in and get started with that, I'm not sure who wants to answer this one. I'm going to start with, what's the best approach to see website customer loyalty? How can I create a dashboard to see if the visitor came back within a certain number of days? I can share my screen, or if someone else wants to share theirs.
I'll share if you like, if anyone wants to speak to anything.
You know, I'd be happy to talk on that one, but one thing I think is really useful is adding in your is a particular visualization, which I think is really helpful, which is your cohort table. So I think if you're
looking, we don't have that one here.
Yeah, so that's okay, because I can just I'll throw that one in real quick, but if we just do visits and visits and do this on a month basis, and I think if you refresh that really quick, if you give it a minute, it's actually I need to save. I should always remember to do that first.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so, or I'll share my. I apologize. I'll share my screen so we can see. Or you're sharing your screen, but
yeah, if you, I mean, I can stop sharing, but if you added it, it should be in there.
Yeah, so that cohort table is building right now, and it's going to build 12 months. Let me change this real quick to.
Why don't I'll stop sharing Gitai. You can share while since you're kind of doing it on the fly.
All right.
I for sure.
All right. So. All right. So here we are. Just going to build this on the. Look at this on a last 12. Let's do last 12 weeks, just because. 12 full weeks. We'll apply that, and then we will take this cohort table, and we'll sort of build this out a little bit. And the cohort table is very specifically going to be just about this sort of thing, about who's returning and who's not returning. So it's really, really quite useful in figuring out who is coming back. So again, we're dealing with some data here, which is demo data, but the way it's built, and let's alter this a little bit more and do this on a granularity, hit build, is it's going to very explicitly tell us exactly this information. How quickly are people coming back? How many people are coming back? And it tells us on a difference from a recurring basis. So we've got some great information down here as well, which is return frequency, which is how many people are coming back in less than a day, 1 to 3 days, things like that. That is all really helpful and good numbers. And we do have some other stuff here that I'm going to let other people speak to. But the cohort table is very much about returns, and also does a lot of good stuff about segmentation that's really easy to add in as well. Although in this case, it's taking its sweet time to, which is why whenever we do our own presentations, we typically make sure that everything is up and running beforehand. But we'll still give it that minute. In the meantime, while that's building, if anybody else would like to speak to these
yeah, I'll speak to them, Gitai. I think these are both kind of out of the box reports. The biggest limiter to, I think, using these things, and you can see the definitions of these, not new, return, and loyal. They're just basically how many previous purchases did you make before this visit, essentially. The biggest limiter to all of these things is the fact that they're out of the box reports based on your implementation, which means these days cookies are limited by many browsers to 7 days. So, unless someone is coming fairly frequently, these aren't as useful maybe as they used to be a few years ago. My primary recommendation would be, if you can, if you have user data, to try and expose that in the data layer, days since last visit, number of previous purchases. If that can be exposed in a data layer and set outright in EVARs and made available in your reporting, that's probably a lot more reliable than cookie-based approaches to a lot of this nowadays. That would be my primary recommendation there.
Yeah, or of course, if you have a CDP, that's also another way to integrate that and get that information out there. Looks like this is finally loaded, so let's go ahead and take advantage. So what we have here is, you can see that for this particular time frame, we have the number of individuals who've come back over a particular course of weeks. So we have right here this 37,559. Of those, 4,415, or 11.8%, came back within 1 week. 5.3% came back within 2 weeks, and so on. And so this is a really nice little view of how people are coming back. One thing I really like about this, so these are great views, like the return frequency right here is a great view. One thing I really like about this is because you really can get the impact of actions that were taken on your site during that time frame. So if you had a really great, so we have a lot more people here, 62,000, and the number keeps going up. But if you had a really great promotion or something like that, or you made a change in functionality to your site and you see that the number of people who are returning went way up, like you can see right here, that really helps you peg the improvement in performance and the improvement in retention specifically to those actions that occurred at that time. So I think a cohort table is really nice. They're also really easy to build. If you saw right here, we just go with what metric we want for including them. In this case, visits, return criteria visits. We could change this to visits with a purchase and return visits with a purchase. So how soon did they come back? There's the opportunity to segment it, things like that. And retention is coming back. Churn is how many people get lost. So basically this just flips it from being that we did so many people that 5.3% returned, all of a sudden comes we lost 94.7. It's a really nice visualization. I think one that most people don't take advantage of. Remember, there's a ton of awesome visualizations here, and I use this one quite a lot. It's really good at exposing oftentimes where there's a problem. I think this is really good at exposing problems, and it really gets a lot of attention because it is so visually striking as well.
All right, fantastic. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add?
No.
All right, let's move on to the next one. How do you prevent bots from entering Adobe Analytics? Despite the extensive experience Lead Guide docs on bots, we still find them coming through. Does anyone have any advice on that?
I can speak to it, sure. Obviously, there's the out-of-the-box bot tracking bot that you can basically enable in the admin console, and that is essentially based on the IAB. I think that's the Internet Advertising Bureau's definition of bots. They apparently they keep a list of these known user agents, IP addresses, things like that that are known to be bots. That's kind of their secret sauce. You can't really look at the details of what that encompasses. So those can be kind of ruled out that way. Another way that you can get that traffic out is to try and behaviorally identify what you perceive to be bots and create a segment within workspace to filter out that data. That is a little challenging in that it's user based, right? In terms of you may be the user error in defining a segment that is too encompassing or not encompassing enough. Additionally, another possibility that I've helped some people implement is if you have or can find a service, and they are out there that will behaviorally identify bot traffic based on what they're doing on your site, the technology. Does someone not having, a graphics card in their machine when they're visiting your site? Well, that's probably a bot, right? But I don't know if the IAB thing is going to identify behavioral things such as that. So you can use services like that. And we've helped people set up where you push the Adobe Analytics Visitor ID to this other service, and they're identifying these things or collecting this information, and you capture the ECID in a customer attribute in Adobe Analytics, then get a download from this service that will classify these ECIDs as different categories of, definitely a bot, maybe a bot, not a bot, and you can create segments based on those things. The challenge there too is that doing something like this, some visitor, air quotes, could be not a bot today, and then that same visitor could be identified as a bot tomorrow as the service gathers and information and learns about the behavior of what that thing's doing. Does it visit every day at exactly 9 a.m. Eastern and enter the same page and look at 10 pages and then leave every day? So these services can be used to identify traffic in such a manner. I will say also that can help you segment the traffic out, but it doesn't actually stop any of this bot traffic from actually sending data to Adobe Analytics. So you're still going to be incurring those server calls and things like that. That trying to identify those things in real time to actually stop that traffic is a lot more challenging.
So the server call, one way that we've gotten around that in the past is by doing it through our tag manager. So identifying it in the tag manager, in this case, it was Telium. We were able to identify it in advance before we were sending those calls to Adobe. And so that prevented us from incurring the server call cost, because this was for a very large hospital system, and there were
communication through the tag management before it went into Adobe Analytics saved us a lot of those server calls. I don't know the technical details because I'm not a dev, but I do know that's what our devs did to do that identification before it was in Adobe. So it's a little more technically complicated, but yeah, it's another way of saving those server calls, and it was a lot. I mean, it was a whole lot.
So someone also asked in the chat if we can show where you activate bot blocking. I'm trying to make my way back there. The sandbox that we have I don't think allow you to kind of go to those settings. Let me share my screen. So I had to navigate to a different property. Sorry, let me share my screen. First off, you need access to report suite settings. That can be found in the top when you go to admin. I have no explanation as to why admin sometimes changes here either in this menu. On the other screen, in the drop down there was admin report suites, but when I'm in report suites, for some reason this is not here. So you may see admin report suites, or go to all admin and then choose report suite settings or report suites here, depending on what your menu looks like today, I guess. So if I pick one of these, if you go to edit settings general, there's an option called bot rules. And I believe it's as simple as just enabling it. I don't think there's really much to do here. If you say add rule, you can actually create your own custom rules here as well to automatically kind of identify things as those. Oh, and here's the checkbox that looks like it's already checked here for the IAB bot filtering. So, if you begin to identify a lot of user agents or IP addresses or ranges here, you can kind of customize this as well to further filter those things out. Again, it will doing it in this manner will automatically filter it out of reporting, so it won't be there to segment out through a virtual report suite. But you again are still incurring the server calls for any traffic that comes from anything that is identified by the bot filtering, by the IAB bot filtering, or by the custom rules that you configure here.
Yeah, and just building off of, I think what Jason was saying before. So when you're identifying the behavioral aspects of this that are maybe slightly less dependent on what the IAB definition is and what that list looks like, a lot of what we've typically looked at historically is unusual trends, right? And then how we might be able to predict those going forward. So like, are we seeing, I think somebody mentioned 0-second visits. There's also high bounce rate, zero conversions, incorrect device types, old browser versions, out of DMA. Maybe you're seeing something that looks like an influx of traffic with zero conversions from a particular area of the country or a different country that you wouldn't typically expect, depending on what your business is like and whether it's international or domestic. I think the idea of forecasting, kind of predicting what certain behaviors will look like once you set up those trends, to be able to think about what that looks like in the future and really look at it in a workspace format, and then being able to leverage the capabilities within workspace to kind of have this happen on a rolling basis and be able to see those alerts if you're setting alerts for yourself based on thresholds that you would typically meet. So as far as kind of blocking server calls and things like that from a functionality perspective, I think, the way that that it was being shown on the screen, and thinking about that in Telium are good considerations. I think there is, a good bit of analysis that's possible within the workspace itself. So just building on the foundation that's there from that IAB definition, but then also saying, like, what are we seeing in trends in our business? Is there anything unusual that really stands out to us? If you're using marketing channels and you're seeing a significant increase in direct load, is that something that's a tracking issue, or is that something that's actually an indication of an unusual pattern of behavior just based on the time period and what you're typically running for your business? So I think, using that combination, being able to use some of the features for automation and stuff like that, and then just building on some of the out-of-the-box capability around bots, can be a pretty effective way to do it. I think if you're thinking about it from a measurement perspective too, and how you're thinking about clickstream, and you might be sending that out to downstream systems, you could potentially think about adding flags to the way that you're pre-processing the data. So I think that's something that is probably more involved than we'll go into on this call, but I think that these are all probably considerations for how you might want to customize it to be most specific to your industry and the way that your business needs to look at the data.
Looks like we also had another question from Damon regarding filtering out or segmenting out your own site visitors. That's always a challenge. And in this case, he's saying that their company uses a VPN, so they can't use IP address as a method of filtering people out. The only thing that I can immediately think of offhand is, on the technology side, somehow if your company can auto set, this is very technology heavy handed, I suppose, right? if your company controls your machines, that, the machine automatically sets a cookie of some kind on browsers, coming out of your own company, that sets a value that's automatically picked up by analytics that you can identify in a variable. But otherwise, if you can't do IP address, is challenging. I think there's a page actually buried in the admin somewhere too, where you can have users click on a link and it will essentially set a cookie on their machine that will force them to be excluded from your own company's reporting. But again, that sort of requires people to actually do that. And that's going to be a tough thing to probably police. So if you don't have IP address capability for filtering, I think it would just take a little more research to find what might work for you. So, unless anyone else has a better answer for that.
So Damon put in there tagging internal users with something like that. I think a pretty reasonable way of going about it. So you if you require that you create your username with like your company email address or something like that, then that's a since somebody external is not going to be doing that. Or if you just make a requirement that the username be with something like internal, some sort of tag like that, and then that's going to be a bit easier to identify them. But it's not, there's not a real cool, super automated solution. It's definitely going to be a lot more manual.
All right, let's move on to the next question, which is the data period comparison function available in workspace? I threw some notes up on this one. I guess I could share my screen. Actually, I don't know that I can. My computer's pretty locked down. Can someone else share theirs?
Yeah, I'll share.
Just cover it. So in a table, if you right click on a table or a column, there's an option to select compare time periods. It'll give you 3 different options, which is the prior period, this period last year, or give you the option to select a range. Into it automatically creates the additional column, which I think is quite time saving because I find dealing with time periods can be frustrating at times, and then offers that percent change column as well, which will which is conditionally formatted. And it's actually something I've done and gone through on multiple iterations. So then if I were to go to the previous one and right click on it, it'll then give me April as well. It's a shortcut to creating those additional time periods too.
And I think Mandy brought up a great point in the chat that if you are comparing time periods and your dimension on the left is time-based, it's only going to allow you to add the time period as opposed to comparing it. So just a consideration.
Absolutely. So the next one's a little bit more complicated. It's just a demo of how to set up a new project in Developer Console to get a private key. Is that something we want to cover here? Or do we think that's something that we could just share?
I can cover it a little bit.
Sure.
First off, I guess, is you need to make sure that you have the proper permissions from someone in your organization. You need developer permissions. And then what you would do is you would go to, and I think there's actually a couple of different ways to get to this. I use console.adobe. I think it's going to do some redirects. Sorry, I got a lot of companies here. I'm having to go to my own company because of the fact that I probably don't have permission for these things for our sandbox. So you'll be presented with this. You can then hit create a new project. The thing that I will mention is, so you're in your project. Again, the first thing you're going to want to do is add an API. You can edit your project to create these things. I will also add that once you create, as soon as you click that create new project button, you don't have to push save. So this project 1 will just be stuck in all of our projects here as a company. So if you want to, if you don't want this to be here permanently, you will need to delete this project at some point. Like I said, there's no save, so it just creates it. But when you hit add an API, the available APIs that you can see here will also be permission based. So you may not be able to see Adobe Analytics, for example. So I'm going to choose Adobe Analytics. And this is something that you may use for something like integration with an SEO provider, for an example. And I will note here, and I think this may have been mentioned. Actually, I guess I do have this pulled up here. I think this was mentioned. Get and how to do this to get a private key. I will note that this is a recent change. Is the deprecation of this JWT option. It looks like you can still select it, but so I don't know exactly when end of life is for this particular connection. This is typically the connection you would choose to generate a private token and get your secret key and all of that for an implementation or an integration with a third party. So it works for now. Don't know how long that will be the case. I think the primary method that they recommend now is this OAuth server to server. I sent one of these up just yesterday, actually, funny enough. for an integration with Bright Edge, which is their on-crawl product, which is like a search engine crawling technology. And they had the OAuth ability. It's a lot simpler to set up OAuth in those cases, because if they have the integration set up with their tool, you essentially just log in and it will remember that. The only trick here is OAuth authentication lasts 2 weeks, I believe. So you may have to re-authenticate and re-log into this thing every 13 days so the integration doesn't break. Whereas the old JWT, I believe, lasts for 3 years. I'm not sure because of this deprecation and this new authentication method of OAuth server to server. I think I saw the notification of this only a couple of weeks ago or 3, so I'm not super familiar with this and its life regarding how long the authentication is valid for. But just for the sake of answering the question, I'll choose the JWT option and choose to generate a. I wish it knew it let you selected that, but it doesn't. This is where you would generate your key pair, copy your values. You can get your keys, download your keys, and then on the next screen, select all of the things you want. And I think it's on the next screen is where you'll see all of the different. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna click off of this because I don't want to share a bunch of secret keys and things like that with the screen share. But it would be on the next screen where you would see the ability to get the technical account ID, the secret keys, organization ID, all of the information that you would need need to set up an integration. Excuse me. I don't think I have anything else to cover on that. If anyone else has any. Oh, was I never sharing my screen that entire time? Or I think I said.
I wasn't sure that you wanted to. I couldn't tell.
Oh, yeah, no, I turned it off because I didn't want to share that part that had secret keys where, it's like I don't want to put my credit card on a screen share or something like that,
You sure?
Not that anyone here probably is so super excited to go, use someone's secret key and do some fun Adobe Analytics stuff, I guess. But, anyway. But if anyone has any additional follow-up questions on that, let me know.
All right, fantastic. So next is in a workspace panel, is there a way to add a filter onto a column for something greater than or less than? Does anyone have an answer to that one? I was looking at the functions.
Yeah, I looked at this with Mandy, who's on the call here, and also helps set up the office hours. And yes, advanced functions are what you would use to do it, and it's not uncomplicated. Damon asked about repeating the question, actually.
Is there in the workspace panel, is there a way to add a filter onto a column for something like greater than or less than? The example is they often have metrics with hundreds of results, but the bulk would have a small value of 1 or 2. When you want to reduce the noise in the results and look at values that are greater than 5, it would allow sorting smaller to large to see more actionable results.
Real quick, Andy, I'm not sure about if you can't see and it says the session will start soon, maybe you should exit and come back in. I'm not sure what that's about. One example of this could also be, and this is again something I looked at yesterday, was rising and falling internal search terms. Show me search terms that had 0 to 100 searches in the last 7 days, or 101 to 200, etc., and kind of creating these bands. But you do have to use the advanced functions within calculated metrics, and you're going to need to create, essentially complex if-else case statements based on that. I don't have an example of it because it is fairly complex. So I don't have an example of it offhand. But in general, you're going to want to look at advanced functions and how they're used.
All right, fantastic. So I looked at that one and I had a difficult time trying to figure it out. The next is, what is the best approach to setting up marketing channel values? So the question here is via query string parameter or tracking code dimension, and what is the difference?
Oof, wow, I typed a lot in there last night and apparently forgot to push save. That question.
I've done that. Katie,
So-
did you look like you had something to add, or sorry?
I'll let Jason go first if he wants to run through what he
Yeah,
had in there.
I'll try.
through it.
I'm just disappointed that I typed a bunch of stuff in there and it's not in there. So I'll just try and remember what I said yesterday. Basically, when you're using tracking codes, I think, number one is consistency. Number two is conciseness. If one of the biggest challenges I see in tracking code creation is you have one marketing department that's creating it this way, another one that's creating it another way, that's highly problematic. You do need to consider conciseness. The max character length of something in Adobe is pretty much 255 characters. So I think UTM parameters was also referenced in this question. One thing that we typically recommend or see people do is concatenate all of their UTM parameters. So you have UTM medium, campaign, keyword, there's other ones. And concatenate those into a single string that you can use for your quote unquote tracking code. And I say quote unquote tracking code because I'll get to that in a minute. The differences between the market channel report and the tracking code report. You want to be consistent in those parameters all the time. So maybe UTM keyword isn't present on an email campaign, probably not. But in your creation of these tracking codes and that's concatenation process, let's say you have 5 UTM parameters that are used in general, make sure you place a 0, or a blank value in the third position if that's where your UTM keyword is. That way you can leverage classification rules to break that concatenated tracking code apart into campaign, medium, etc. One of the things that was also referenced in this question was we have the marketing channel report set to, I believe, 30 days and tracking code set to 7 days. And my immediate thought there, and I don't know what everyone else's thoughts are on this, but don't mix the marketing channel report with the tracking code report in general. It will lead to some weird results. The reason being, the marketing channel report tries to assign 100% of traffic to visitors, or visitors to a channel all the time. The tracking code report is basically just an EVAR and will only have a value if you have some query parameter in the URL. So in other words, you're not going to see direct, internal, natural search, referring traffic, such as just naturally occurring traffic from social media, won't be visible in the tracking code report. And that'll create some weird issues where you come in through an email campaign. The marketing channel report knows it's email because of the way you've configured the rules. And then tomorrow, this is all theoretical. You could come in tomorrow by typing in direct. There are reasons why direct may or may not override, but I guess we won't get into that. But theoretically, if you came in that next day direct and had, that's your channel there, but you could theoretically still have an email tracking code and now pop up in your direct channel as a tracking code. You're just going to get some weird mixes of tracking codes that they don't appear like they should belong in a channel, and it's going to be because of that, because you're mixing one EVAR that only gets set if you have a parameter and another essentially EVAR that gets set 100% of the time. So it's going to create some weirdness. And in general, I would probably, if you are going to break things down in such a manner with other EVARs, at least make sure that they're the same expiration period of 30 or 7 days. But still, I probably wouldn't recommend that in general. Anyone else want to elaborate?
Yeah, I can jump in here on this too. So I think you brought up a good point with classifications and the concatenation. So another way that we've seen classifications help with this is actually essentially backwards classifying the tracking codes, right? So I agree 100% with what Jason was saying in terms of not mixing your marketing channel and your tracking codes, because you're kind of going at it from two different directions. But to be able to use those classifications to essentially create your own marketing channel buckets so that you can do a comparison of both. I've just seen some of the out-of-the-box functionality in terms of how it's attributing 100% to a channel and the ability to manipulate that using some of the out-of-the-box capabilities. Like, it's super functional in general. It depends on your business in a lot of instances, but kind of bucketing by browser and then also bucketing by some of the values in a linear way doesn't always suit the needs for how some of these things are classified depending on the business and how you have your taxonomy structure, right? So if you're thinking about channel, sub-channel, sub-channel, and depending on how you do that, it gave some challenges in a prior role that I was in terms of how we were able to cross-cut sub-channel and platform and things like that, depending on kind of the device types that were most commonly used. So it was a way that we were able to create a level of flexibility with classifications without having to take up some additional EVARs on that by backwards classifying the tracking codes. I think this is also interesting for one of the other questions that was brought up that I think we'll probably have time to get to, which was about attribution using multiple dimensions or metrics and that kind of skewing things when you're trying to change the model. So I think looking at tracking codes and aggregating it that way can sometimes give some flexibility just to be able to shift the attribution model and not have things kind of conflicting with each other in terms of how those buckets are actually happening. And then, I think just going back again to what was said before, that the taxonomy is super important, right? So how you're actually tracking this. One of the things to consider is just the cardinality aspect of it and how many unique strings that you're using, how you're being able to track your marketing campaigns, how you're assigning the UTM parameters to that, and kind of the volume of unique values that are coming in and how you're classifying that within your buckets. So definitely some considerations, I think, using the out-of-the-box capabilities to be able to ensure that you're setting things up in a uniform way is really great. I think just playing around with the tracking codes and being able to see how you can differently bucket that and then comparing the data is a good way to do that too. And then I think, kind of doing that side-by-side comparison so you actually get a visual of that can be really interesting when you're doing that in two freeform tables to be able to look at the difference between how you're thinking about marketing channels and how you're thinking about tracking codes so that they're not kind of butting heads when it comes to looking at that in a single table. So.
Do you want to jump down and touch on the attribution models with multiple dimensions question?
Sure, I could take a stab at it. The attribution stuff is tricky. So if anybody else has info there, feel free. I was kind of doing it on the fly while we were talking about this, but I can share my screen. I think what I do in a lot of these instances, because when I was starting and kind of midway through my analytics journey and getting more familiar with the UI, was I was nesting a lot of things and my tables were becoming really heavy. And what I've started to really do in more recent years is to be able to use a lot of the functionality to be able to do filters. So let me show my screen, see if I can actually pull up the right window here. You would think for somebody who works in some sort of tech and data, I'd have an easier time with my AV setup, but that is kind of a constant challenge working from home. All right, so what I did here was just to pull in, it was kind of a long question, so let me just state this for anybody, and it's also a little bit of an eye chart, so let me see if I can.
Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Yeah, I was trying to get
okay, awesome, thank you so much.
Compare both screens things. Let's see here. All right. I think I got it. Sorry, it's not quite cooperating. So just to restate the question, I'm struggling applying attribution models when there are a lot of dimensions that need to be considered. For example, I'm looking at a U-shaped 90-day model. I need to break this down by channel, parent, campaign, and several other attributes. Do I just keep nesting dimensions? I don't get the same results when the order of dimensions change. For example, sometimes I want to see performance aggregated by marketing channel. So I think there's a couple of considerations here. I think it depends on what your attributes and your dimensions are. But the way that I would generally do this And I think it's tough because sometimes you just want to look at everything at the same time. It's probably going to skew your results, in my opinion. If anybody else has a differing opinion, feel free to chime in there. But what I would typically do to be able to kind of reduce the noise and be able to look at this and try to form my hypotheses, and then be able to go back and figure out everything that needs to go into the table or the workspace. And there's obviously like attribution panels and ways for you to leverage some of the out-of-the-box functionality. I tend to lean on a freeform table in this instance. So I'm not sure everyone knows about this, so I can show this. When you're pulling in a dimension and you want to be able to look at this by individual values, what you can do is you can actually drag, let's see if I can do this in a somewhat less clunky way. If I'm pulling marketing channel in here as a filter and I hit shift, it'll give me a drop down. And then I can actually essentially segment my entire table by an individual channel. So instead of saying, I want to look at all of my marketing channels, I want to look at all of my attributes, I want to look at my campaigns, and just keeping in mind too, this doesn't have a classification on your campaign. So depending on how you're noting your campaigns with friendly names, how you want to be able to look at those values, that's something that's just a consideration here. I would say that you could probably kind of isolate the marketing channels and be able to look at it in that way. Also, just another note, frequently because of the kind of cardinality aspect of this, depending on if you're looking at this by tracking code, if you're looking at this by actual campaign value, you have the ability to eliminate unspecified here right from this line item. So if you're like, I know that I'm going to have a bunch of unspecified values, but I don't want that to kind of muck up my table, you can eliminate that from there. Obviously, you're going to be kind of limited in terms of what values you can actually apply an attribution model or a non-standard attribution model to. For anybody who's like less familiar with this, you would click on the gear and go to use a non-default attribution model, and then apply your look back window as well as the type of attribution model you want to apply. I frequently look at the participation model as an example. So I want to be able to see what marketing channel influenced a conversion, but I want to be able to see that in terms of the full set of interactions on a site. So I see that there's a question about applying a filter like this, materially altering attribution. So yes, that can. I think it really depends on what the hypothesis is that you're trying to get to. If you're trying to look across all of your marketing channels and look at the influence of the point of access at which someone is entering their site, you may want to look at all of them together. I think the way that I was reading this question, and maybe that was not 100% correct, Kayla, because I see that you're the one who submitted it, was to kind of maybe think about how you're reducing kind of the volume of things and how those are nesting. So I would say if anybody else has contributions here just based on the additional question that Kayla noted, feel free to chime in. But I do find that this is a way that I start to approach the data that way. And then instead of nesting, I would also create kind of segmentation to be able to look at that within the individual dimensions, just to kind of reduce down the data set. But if you're trying to look at this really broadly, I would say that there's specific use cases, right? So again, if you're looking at marketing channels and you want to look at all marketing channels, you may not want to be able to apply this as a filter, but you know, I think it's not always the best answer to say. It depends on the individual use case and the dimensions that you want to look at, but I'm happy for anyone else on the call to kind of chime in here and add something to this.
I just, and the idea of using the participation attribution model, I am a big fan of the participation model, in part because it makes the fewest assumptions. And I think it also gives a very holistic view of what is really working overall. I love to place it right next. I like to place the visits metric right next to the orders metric, and have them both be just have the orders be under participation. And at that point, what you see is something like, hey, email was 6% of my visits, but 12% of my conversions. That's giving you an idea that your email channel is acting effectively. And if you see something that direct is 40% of your visits, but only 12% of your conversions, then you get a really nice idea that maybe direct visitors are not converting for some reason. It gives you a really good opportunity to look into what might not be working with that channel. I also generally advise being very cautious about different attribution models in general. I think that they all tell a story. You can look at every single one of them and they will tell a different story very quickly, with the exception if you just have a really high first visit conversion rate. So if you're in a model where 80% of people convert on their first visit, then the attribution models are not generally especially helpful to begin with, aside from, hey, that's what it always is going to be. But I generally advise being very cautious about it, because they will all tell a story. They will all be telling you the story that you're asking them to tell, because through an attribution model, you are shaping the story, putting a U-shape on that story. You are saying that the first and last visits are the most important ones, and we're intentionally discounting the middle ones. So be very, very careful about your attribution models, and you have to understand that you're shaping the story with them. So be thoughtful about it. But I love, so as we see right here, just what I was talking about earlier, display in this instance is 20.6% of visits and 30% of conversions. That would indicate that display is particularly effective. If we look at one of the other ones down here, social campaigns, 16% of visits, but only 12.7% of conversions. That's a nice indication right there that social is punching under its weight. It's not doing as well. Whereas comparison shopping, 16.6% of visits, 16.2% of orders, that's really close by. That's kind of just that's telling you like, hey, maybe there's room for improvement, but at least I'm not doing terribly. So this is a really great view that I love to put in front of clients with participation, with who are talking about attribution models. And it's just really easy to understand, really brings home exactly what where their conversions are coming from. You have to explain participation like, hey, the number adds up to more than 100%, but it's like, this is what's influencing, this is where the heaviest influence of your various channels are coming from. Because if it's any sort of multi-visit conversion, then there's never one single channel that is absolutely 100% responsible for that. So I think it's a nice nuanced view. And so again, with shape, J shape, all of those, you're shaping the story in particular ways, making a lot of assumptions, and they might be right for your business, but you really have to understand that's how that is. You have to have really good, strong evidence that is the attribution model for your business. This one, I think, is a bit more generally applicable. That's not to say universally, but more generally applicable. But I have lots of thoughts on attribution models, lots and lots. So I'll stop there.
We'll probably have to talk. We've been dealing with attribution models and measuring an experiment I've been working on is, we're testing out different types of marketing campaigns internally, and which one leads to a credit card app start or submit when that's, 6 or 7 steps down the line. We can decide, would the user have gone there anyway? And I think the attribution metrics are really helping us, especially when some of our campaign codes, they're props and they don't persist. So it's something we're definitely working on. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. Next one is, can you show multiple visuals side by side for each panel? Someone can share their screen. We have some notes up here too. Who wants to take this?
I didn't populate this one, but I'm happy to share my screen. If somebody wants to talk through it, I can talk through it as well. But since I was just sharing, let me share this.
That'd be great. I put the visuals up. I didn't write the text just to show, what it would look like.
Sure.
But the idea is that, you can put the visualizations, and one of the key pieces here to do is to lock those values down so you can choose different options for it. Someone else want to talk through this too?
I don't think so. Sorry, go ahead, Gitai. I was going to say, I think it's fairly straightforward. Maybe the locking was the question. Go ahead, Gitai.
Yeah, so there's summary numbers. If you want to click on, if you see the little lock icon,
if you see the little lock icon that's up by summary number, then yeah, you've got to make sure that they're locked. Otherwise, they will change and they'll start being dynamic. One thing I do like to point out, though, that's really important, particularly if you see there's a list right down there. If you click on the lock to show the lock options, you can lock to position, or you can lock to that specific item. Be careful about that, because if you're locking to position and something flips position, you're going to be
intended. So if you're going with a selected item, so in this case, if you're going with category 5, then it's always going to be with category 5. That's selected items. If you go with selected positions,
you're going with the number 2. So if category 2 starts exceeding category 5 in popularity, you're going to be reporting on something different. So be careful with that. There are definitely reasons to use selected positions versus selected items, but it's something that you can definitely put these on there. One of the visualizations that I just am loving is the KPI visualization, and you can just drop those in and they have the comparison ones. I used to have to do all that stuff manually, and it was like a huge pain. And now, like, I mean, I was good at it, but now it's like a really quick task as opposed to a task that was manual and repetitive and kind of painful. It's just like, and they're beautiful little ones. So yeah, but it's pretty, yeah, just make sure you've got that locked in there, and you'll have many visualizations that you can have side by side, lots of different things. And yeah, it's once you know, it's always just a matter of right clicking half the time, and you find something really cool in a workspace.
Yeah, I just want to +1 using templates and other seemingly like non-related kind of reports to be able to use that as a format or visualization to apply to something else. So just further customizing it to your needs. I think there's things that I wouldn't think of on my own to be able to do, and also positioning too, right? Like you can have something that's full width. It can be a visualization. You can have smaller boxes, and I think it's given me some much nicer looking reports that I would come up with on my own. So fully, want to second that. I would say to that point, making sure that you're thinking about the position and the item, and also making sure that you're not clicking into your data within the table in a way that's going to change your visualization in an unintended way, right? So sometimes you'll go through, and if you're doing a live demo versus giving somebody a PDF versus sending the report on its own so that they can view it in Workspace themselves, if you're clicking into different values for some folks that are maybe less familiar with working in this in more advanced ways, just make sure you're being careful about how you're clicking into your values and what that's doing to your visualizations as you're doing that.
All right, fantastic. We've got 4 more minutes. The question is about measuring page scroll and implementation for that. I've never implemented, I've used it. So
I think it's pretty straightforward. Quick one to answer, probably. It has to be done with a JavaScript plugin, pretty much, really. I believe Adobe even has a plugin that does it. I don't have the URL offhand, but I'm sure you can find it to download and install. Basically what it does is it will identify the scroll depth, and then when you pass to a second page, it will then trigger on that second page to say what the page was, the previous page, like what the previous page was essentially, and the scroll percentage. So, note that if someone is on a single page and scrolls down 3/4 of the way and then closes the tab or leaves your site, you're not going to get necessarily that data. And I wouldn't recommend implementing it in any way if, yeah, Damon, that's exactly right. Yeah, what if they exit and there's no next page? Well, so theoretically, you can do what I'm going to say not to do here, which is you could send breakpoints of 25, 50, 75, and 100, for example, as they actually occur. You have to be careful that and this is probably a little beyond the out of the box capabilities of that JavaScript, because if someone just flies down the page really fast with the scroll wheel on their mouse, I don't know that you want to fire 25, 50, 75, 100. You're sending 4 server calls. The page load itself, 25, 50, 75, 100. That's 5 server calls actually that you're sending. at once. And Adobe's billing is based on server call volume essentially. So you got to be careful about that. You would essentially have to build some kind of delay that they stop at a certain point, then send the server call if you want to do that. I will add with the last minute that I don't find scroll tracking to be all that useful because I see people implement it, but I don't know that I've ever really seen anyone say, okay, this page has a 35% scroll rate. What are we going to do now from an A/B optimization standpoint to improve that or not improve that? That number 35% doesn't necessarily mean anything, because does that mean they only scrolled 35% because everything was immediately right there, or they had to scroll down to 35% because they couldn't find? There's a lot of really challenging ways to interpret that data. So it's just a number. I don't know that it means anything necessarily. So that's why I wouldn't encourage additional server calls for it at a minimum. So I know we're at the top of the hour now, but sorry, that's my soapbox on the value of scroll tracking in general, I suppose. But
if we're
I'm
talking
going to chime in. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If we're talking about A/B testing, there have been a number of occasions where I've just chopped off almost everything below the fold that wasn't mandatory and seen conversion go up by as much as 20%. I think you might be able to use it to justify that kind of test, but it's just as easy to just run the test. I love those big swing tests where it's just like, no, 80% of your content is useless. So enjoy.
All right, we're right at the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone so much for their time. Jason, Gitai, and Katie, thank you guys also so much for sharing. And any questions that weren't answered will be moved on to next month's office hours. Please feel free to reach out to any of us, or go to Experience League if there's something you need that's more urgent, and the community will be happy to help. Have a fantastic day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.